Today I'm in a city that is referred to by many as Europe's most divided city, where walls like the ones you see around me were built more than 50 years ago to separate the different religious and national communities that live within the city and protect them from violence, and 50 years later they're still standing strong. A few years ago I came across this article by the Washington Post about terrorist attacks in Europe in recent history, and it included a very interesting map of fatal terrorist attacks in Europe since 1970. I predicted some of the hotspots like near Ukraine's border with Russia, like in the Balkans because of the 90s Kosovo conflict, and in the Caucasus region of Russia where Chechnya fought for independence. But what really surprised me and eventually brought me here is that the region with visually the highest concentration of attacks was not in any of those places, but right here in this very heavily disputed part of the UK called Northern Ireland. This was due to a violent religious and political conflict centered in Northern Ireland from the 1960s to the 1990s, where thousands of people were killed and almost 50,000 people were injured. Just to put it in scale, there were more than 10,000 bombings in Northern Ireland alone. And today I'm in Belfast, which is the capital of Northern Ireland, which was the epicenter of the violence. Looking into it further, what really surprised me is how divided the city still is to this day. Most of the world barely even talks about the issues here, but these walls are not just relics of the past, and many of the people that are living in these communities think of these walls as very necessary for preventing further violence. On top of that, the difference in general opinions in the separated areas are also startling. In this video, we're going to learn about how the divisions created during the colonization of Ireland eventually led to the horrors that this place saw in the 20th century. We're also going to talk about how the worst of the bloodshed ended. And in the end, we're going to learn about how things are looking now and what is looking like the path forward for the people from here to move past what happened. We are in Belfast in Northern Ireland. We're actually 8 kilometers south of the city in this place called Giant's Ring. Me and my friend Eoin, who does a lot of YouTube videos on Irish history and other stuff. You can check out his channel. We're together on this video to tell you the story of what happened here and what's going to happen. And a lot has actually happened here in the last 2 days. Today is June 11th, so you can look up what happened on June 9th in Belfast. We'll go over that at the end of the video because that's not really relevant or directly relevant to what we're talking about in the scope of this video, but you might hear a lot of helicopter sounds throughout the video, so don't be confused. So we'll explain at the end of the video. It is the middle of June and it is cold and freezing, and this is exactly how I remember this part of the world last time I was here in the summer. There's a reason I don't come back to Great Britain and Ireland in any other time of the year. All right, so we're in this place called Giant's Ring. If you look at it visually, it's just some stones in the middle, and we're surrounded by this giant ring or this elevated ground structure. And there's evidence of human settlement on the island of Ireland that goes back over 10,000 years. This particular place was built around 2700 BC, so almost close to 5,000 years ago. It was built by Ireland's early farming communities. So it's believed that this whole area was used for different ceremonies, gatherings, and rituals, and this particular thing behind me was most likely used for burials. What is interesting is that this was built around the same time as some of the later pyramids of Giza were being built. What is also very important is that this shows that agriculture and farming and civilizations like this existed on the island of Ireland thousands of years before people from Britain or that side of the sea first arrived. So by around 4000 BC, farming had begun on the island, and by around 3500 BC, places like the Caja fields had some of the world's oldest known field systems. Ireland was never part of the Roman Empire, even at its greatest extent, but there was definitely trade with Roman Britain across the Irish Sea. By the 6th century, Christianity had spread across Ireland, bringing writing, monasteries, and a major shift in the Irish culture. From the late 8th century, Vikings began raiding here and then settling along coasts and rivers, founding trading towns such as Dublin. So the Vikings that settled here and created these towns helped connect Ireland more strongly to international trade, and they introduced this island to a silver-based economy and the usage of coins for the first time. I want to take a minute to talk about today's sponsors. That is Epidemic Sound. That is a very special sponsor. They have been my main source of royalty-free music throughout my entire professional career as a content creator. It's a very convenient platform for creators like me to find licensed music that won't lead to any copyright strikes or any takedowns. And right now they have a library of over 55,000 musical tracks and over 250,000 sound effects, all professionally produced. So every time you see me in a cinematic sequence with the perfect music, or see a documentary segment with the right music that brings out the mood, or see me use sound effects to make an impact or to zoom into what's important, chances are all of that is from Epidemic Sound. I also really like their new AI-powered tools. They have this feature called Assistant, where you can basically type in what kind of music you're looking for your video, and it suggests the best tracks. And there's also this feature called Adapt, where you can find a track, and if it's not exactly the way you want it to be for your video, you can modify the length, you can modify certain sounds to make it better fit the mood of your video. So if you'd like to try out Epidemic Sound for yourself, you can use the link in my video description to get a 1-month free trial of using your music or sound effects in your videos. And once you use that in your free trial, you can keep those videos up forever, monetized with no issues at all. On top of that, if you use my promo code Nadir, N-A-D-I-R, then you get 50% off your next 2 months of paid subscription fees. Another reason I love them is that when you're a creator, you get a referral link when you start using the platform. And just by having others use that referral link, you get like a certain amount of credits that goes towards paying your subscription. So when I started using Epidemic Sound, I'm gonna be honest, I never ever paid for the subscription fees because I had that referral link, and those credits that I got ended up paying for my subscription fees altogether. So if you're looking for a reliable source of licensed music and an incredible library of sound effects, make sure you check out Epidemic Sound. It's a service that I can wholeheartedly recommend. Using the link in the description, using my promo code definitely helps out this channel and helps me make videos like this one as well. Now back to Belfast. We took a bus and a train for like almost an hour, and we came to this famous castle called Carrickfergus Castle that is northeast of Belfast, and that is like overlooking an important port. In 1169, from across the Irish Sea, from the island of Great Britain, the Norman invasion of Ireland begun. Then in 1171, King Henry II of England personally came to Ireland with a large force to bring the Norman lords under his control and assert direct English royal authority. Then in 1177, the Norman Knights began the construction of this castle that you see behind me after conquering the region. So these events essentially marked the beginning of what would later become more than 800 years of English political and military involvement on this island. Ireland would essentially go on to become the first colony of what later became the British Empire, the largest empire to ever exist on this planet. So very importantly, England became Protestant in the 16th century and increasingly saw Ireland as strategically important because they were afraid that hostile Catholic powers could use the island of Ireland as a base to attack Britain. To strengthen its control, England carried out a series of colonization projects called plantations, where they were settling loyal Protestants from England and Scotland on land taken from the Irish Catholic landowners over here. So over time, the English government also passed a lot of laws that stripped the Irish Catholics from their political power, land ownership rights, and economic influence, creating a massive imbalance of power in Irish society. And this created divisions that would shape Irish history for the next couple of centuries. In 1801, Ireland and Great Britain were merged into a single state called the United Kingdom that was governed from London. So many of the policies that were used to govern the island of Ireland heavily favored the Protestant elite and heavily discriminated against the Catholic people living in Ireland. And at the same time, potatoes became the staple food of Ireland. Then there was the Great Famine from 1845 to 1852, where potato crops failed across the whole country and Ireland was devastated. So what's really interesting is that even during the famine, Ireland continued producing potatoes at a high scale, but a lot of it was exported to other parts of the United Kingdom under the prevailing economic policy. And because of this famine, around 1 million people died. Unsurprisingly, the British government was widely criticized for mishandling the whole situation. So not only did like 1 million people die, but many more millions of people were forced to emigrate to have a chance at being alive. The population of Ireland collapsed from 8 million people before the famine started to around 4.5 million people at the start of the 20th century. What's really interesting is that the population of the island of Ireland, to this day, even after growing a lot over the last century, is still not as much as it used to be before the Great Famine. Another very interesting thing that happened was that before the Great Famine, most people on the island spoke Irish. The famine also particularly devastated rural areas where Irish was more likely to be spoken instead of English by most people. So it accelerated the decline of the Irish language, and later English became the more broadly spoken language on the island. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, Irish political movements fought the government's discriminatory policies and injustice to regain more rights, land and self-government. Over time, the land reforms that were introduced reduced the power of the large English landowners in Ireland and allowed the Irish tenant farmers to be able to purchase their own land. After decades of political struggle, rebellion, and ultimately violence, Ireland finally gained independence from Britain in 1922. So 1922 was just 1 year after Afghanistan gained independence from British influence, and the same year as Egypt gained independence from British rule. But independence from Britain came with a major caveat. Only a part of Ireland was allowed independence, and the nation was partitioned. And the northeast part of the island, the part that we're in now, would remain part of the UK even after the rest of it gained independence. During the Industrial Revolution, Belfast had actually grown into a very rich and powerful industrial city as one of Ireland's most important ports. The infamous Titanic was built right here in Belfast a decade before the partition. And at the time of the partition, Belfast was actually Ireland's biggest city. Most of the island of Ireland was rural and Catholic, but the northeast part around Belfast was largely Protestant as a legacy of the centuries of settlements from English and Scottish people. And this was a part of the population that was particularly wealthy because this area was so industrialized. So these Protestants didn't just fear the loss of their political power in Catholic majority Ireland. They also feared the loss of their economic power and wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom. So they wanted to resist being governed by this Catholic majority Ireland, and they started forming paramilitary groups who were ready to fight in a war if that was what was needed for them to remain part of the United Kingdom. So when most of Ireland gained independence in 1922, the island was partitioned. 6 predominantly Protestant counties in the northeast remained part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland, while the rest became what is now the Republic of Ireland. So this partition shaped many of the conflicts that this region of Northern Ireland would face over the upcoming century. Now, along with a divided Ireland, there were 2 new political identities inside of Northern Ireland. There were the Republican nationalists who were almost entirely Catholic that wanted a united Ireland controlled by a united central government. And then there were the loyalist unionists that were almost always Protestants who wanted Northern Ireland to remain as part of the United Kingdom under the influence of the government in London. Okay, right now I'm in front of Stormont Estate, which is the seat of Northern Ireland's government. It was like a kilometer of a walk to walk up here, and I have to say, this might be the most beautiful walk to any government building on earth I've ever been on in my life so far. When Northern Ireland was first created within the UK in 1921, this became the political heart of a new state. Now, this new government was democratic by name, but in reality, it was designed to heavily favor the Protestant majority living in Northern Ireland. For decades, the government operating from here was dominated by unionist politicians. So in cities like Derry, election boundaries were gerrymandered so that the unionists could control councils even if the Catholics were majority in certain areas. If you don't know what gerrymandering is, it is not within the scope of this video to try to explain that, but I'll provide a link in the video description for another video that will explain that to you. So voting in the local elections was also tied to owning property, which means that Catholics that didn't own as much property as the Protestants were often underrepresented in these elections as well. On top of that, business owners who were disproportionately Protestant could sometimes get extra votes. By the 1960s, Catholic civil rights activists were demanding an end to the discrimination. A movement towards non-violent protests emerged, inspired in part by the civil rights movement in the US. But what began as peaceful protests soon descended into violent riots between the Unionists and the Republican communities. This violence led to the deployment of the British troops onto the streets of Northern Ireland in 1969. But instead of being able to restore order, it had the opposite effect. The violence dramatically escalated over the following years.
And an insurance against loyalist attacks. 2,000 families left their homes.
So right now we came to Ballymurphy, which is a Catholic neighborhood in Belfast, which became the site of one of the most controversial incidents in the modern history of Northern Ireland. So in 1971, the British Army launched a massive operation in this neighborhood following the introduction of internment without trial, which is a policy that allowed suspects of violence to be jailed without a charge or trial. This whole neighborhood was kind of like blocked off by the British Army, and over 10 days the British shot and killed 10 civilians. A later inquiry found that all of the people that were killed were innocent.
50 years after they died, a coroner has ruled that 10 people who were killed in Belfast in 1971, almost all of them by British soldiers, had been entirely innocent.
So this event would go on to be known as the Ballymurphy Massacre, and this dramatically increased the nationalist Republican anger towards the British Army. In the following year, 1972, in the city of Derry, or Londonderry, which was predominantly a Catholic city, British troops had been deployed onto the streets as tensions and violence escalated between nationalists and unionists. On a day that was later termed Bloody Sunday, thousands of people took to the streets of Derry as part of a civil rights march protesting discrimination against the Catholics and the British policy of internment without trial. British soldiers then opened fire on the unarmed protesters, shooting 26 people and killing 14 of them. So this became a very important point because these killings, along with the failure to properly prosecute the soldiers that were responsible for the massacre, became a powerful symbol of anger of the Republican Catholic portion of the population against British rule in Northern Ireland. And a lot of people in the Catholic community started believing that it was pointless to be engaging in peaceful demonstrations, or it was even suicidal in this case to be engaging in peaceful demonstrations.
For them, the troops were murderers and the dead were martyrs. And the events of that confused afternoon became indelibly engraved on Catholic consciences in the phrase Bloody Sunday.
So Bloody Sunday dramatically increased the support and recruitment for the Irish Catholic Republican paramilitary groups like the Provisional Irish Republican Army, or the IRA. Following this, the IRA grew more powerful and carried out more bombings and attacks across Northern Ireland and Britain in an attempt to fight against the government. And in response to this, paramilitary groups on the Protestant Unionist sides that were already there also became increasingly active and violent, carrying out their own shootings, killings, and bomb attacks. So the ensuing conflict would come to be known as the Troubles and would claim the lives over the next few decades of more than 3,500 people, and almost 50,000 people would get injured in the conflict. And I think the name, the Troubles, is a euphemism for what turned out to be, by a mile, the deadliest conflict in Western Europe since World War II. From the 70s to the 90s, the city of Belfast became one of the main battlegrounds of the Troubles. So bombings, shootings, riots, and all kinds of violence became a part of everyday life in the city. Behind me, you see Europa Hotel in what is now the peaceful city center of Belfast. But back in the days, during the conflict, at one point, this was the most bombed hotel in the world.
Standing in the middle of Belfast is the Europa, the most bombed hotel in the world.
This hotel behind me alone was bombed more than 30 times, as the city center of Belfast was targeted by the IRA bombing campaigns over the years. At the height of the violence in the 70s, parts of the city almost resembled a war zone. British soldiers patrolled the streets. Armored vehicles driving around the city were common sight. Buildings were regularly destroyed by explosions. And many people in the city lived in the constant fear of bomb attacks or explosions. So at this point, neighborhoods in Belfast became divided across religious and political lines. And to keep the neighboring communities safe from the violence, peace walls, like the massive walls that you see behind me, started to be built during the early years of the Troubles. Now, even decades after the Troubles are over, these peace walls still exist, and they're still separating communities, and the gates to these walls are still only open at certain hours of the day. One of the most cited studies was from Ulster University in 2012 that looked at public attitudes to peace walls. And it found that 69% of people that are living closest to the peace walls believe that the walls must remain for now because of the potential potential of violence. Many residents feared renewed sectarian violence if the walls were removed. And some believed that the police would not be able to maintain order without them. What's crazy is that on the houses that are by the peace walls, there's still like cages on the back of the houses in case someone still throws like a petrol bomb over the wall. Right now we're on Falls Road, which is the Nationalist Republican side. And we're gonna go through these gates and we're gonna go into Shankill Road, which is gonna be the Loyalist Unionist side. You're gonna see a big difference as we cross over. So first of all, on this side, we're gonna see a lot of Irish flags, the tricolor flag. And you also see something that maybe a lot of you might not expect if you've never been to this region. You also see a lot of Palestinian flags because the Irish people, at least the Republican nationalist side, they identify with the Palestinian cause more. And then we cross over and we go over to that side, you're gonna see a lot more Union Jacks because these are the people that wanted to stay in the UK. And you're also gonna see a lot of Israeli flags, which is something that I really didn't know about even until like a year or two ago. Okay, on that side you see the gate to the Nationalist Republican side, and just like you cross over here and you have the gate to the Loyalist Unionist side. We just entered Shankill Road and you start seeing a lot more Union Jack flags, and you see a lot more murals for the Queen or King Charles at this point. And what is really interesting, like I said earlier, is the connection to Israel. Right behind me, right here, is this like big painting or graphic or whatever you call it. You see like the Union Jack on one side, and right here you see an IDF soldier with the Israeli flag. So the deadliest time of the Troubles, or when the most people died, was in the early 1970s, with 1972 being the most deadly year. By the early 1970s, Northern Ireland was close to complete breakdown. In the middle of growing criticism that the Unionist-dominated government here was unable to govern impartially or contain the violence, the British government decided to suspend the Northern Irish Parliament in 1972 and decided to impose direct rule from London itself. Then in 1981, the hunger strikes of IRA prisoners held in British prisons became a major turning point. Imprisoned IRA member Bobby Sands got elected to the British Parliament in a Catholic majority constituency in Northern Ireland.
Bobby Sands has been duly elected to serve as a member for the said constituency.
Of course, he died a few weeks later because of the hunger strike. But this whole episode became a powerful moment for the Republican movement.
This was the burial of Bobby Sands, martyr, the full paraphernalia of an IRA military funeral. The Irish tricolour draped over the coffin.
Behind me right now is actually the most famous mural of Bobby Sands. This moment was important because it showed to outsiders that the IRA had much broader political support in the Catholic community in Northern Ireland than many had assumed before. This also helped push the Republican nationalist movement toward a strategy of continuing armed struggle, while also seriously pursuing elections and political negotiations, which is very important. At the same time, the British government and the Republic of Ireland's government were getting increasingly more and more afraid of the violence spilling into other areas, into other parts of the region, and they started to realize that a military solution was unlikely to end the conflict by itself. Many feared that if the conflict continued escalating, Northern Ireland could descend into a full-scale sectarian civil war, while the violence increasingly spilled into Britain and threatened wider stability across the region. The 1985 Anglo-Irish Agreement improved cooperation between the governments in London and Dublin and showed that the British and Irish governments were willing to work together directly on Northern Ireland despite fierce protests or backlash from the Unionists. By the 1990s, the IRA had come to realize, or many factions of the IRA had come to realize, that violence alone was unlikely to lead to a united Ireland. This was more relevant, especially as the broader nationalist movement was gaining more and more political influence through elections and negotiations at this time. At the same time, the British government came to realize that Northern Ireland could not be governed in the long run in a peaceful way without some serious reforms to how the government worked and without wider cooperation between the communities living in Northern Ireland. Secret contacts, ceasefires, negotiations, and changing political leadership in both Britain and Ireland slowly pushed the peace process forward in the 1990s. This eventually led to the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which eventually brought an end to the Troubles, although some violence by dissident Republican groups continued afterward. The Good Friday Agreement seriously changed how the government worked in Northern Ireland and led to a larger power power sharing agreement between the Unionists and the Nationalists, where both of them would have to cooperate together instead of one side dominating the other like they used to. It also reformed policing, expanded protections for the Catholic minority in Northern Ireland, and recognized both British and Irish identities within Northern Ireland. Very importantly, the Good Friday Agreement also created a peaceful political pathway to a future unification of Ireland if the majority of people living in Northern Ireland were to vote for it. So the Good Friday Agreement ultimately succeeded in bringing a long-lasting peace, but the power-sharing government structure that was created out of that has often struggled to function smoothly. In the decades after the peace agreement, Northern Ireland continued facing repeated political crises and deadlocks, including disputes over the IRA disarmament in the early 2000s, the collapse of the government institutions for several years after 2017 over disagreements, and repeated standoffs between the Unionists and Nationalist parties over how the region should be governed. But despite all of that, most people here would agree that whatever they have now here is much better than the times of the Troubles, where violence and living in a fear of violence was part of everyday life. Over the years, the British government has also formally apologized for some of the most controversial actions carried out during the Troubles, including the killings on Bloody Sunday.
What happened on Bloody Sunday was both unjustified.
More recently, Brexit and all of the problems that came following Brexit have made a lot more people in Northern Ireland more open to the idea of reunification with Ireland. So according to the 2021 census, people from a Catholic background slightly outnumbered those from a Protestant background in Northern Ireland for the first time since the creation of this state. But what's interesting is that the lines are much more blurred today than they were, let's say, 50, 60 years ago. Not all Catholics in Northern Ireland support reunification with Ireland. Not all Protestants want to stay part of the UK. What's also interesting is that polling has found that more and more Brits care less and less about the state of Northern Ireland. Polling by YouGov found that 54% of Brits said that they would not be bothered either way if Northern Ireland left the UK. More Brits supported letting Northern Ireland vote on its future than opposed it. An interesting trend has also been with young people. 57% of 18 to 24-year-old people living in Northern Ireland said that they would vote for unification. But the legacy of the Troubles remain visible today. Peace walls, like I showed you, still divide parts of Belfast, and many people still remember the violence. So what's interesting is that many people send their kids to different schools. From what I gathered from talking to kids across both sides of the wall when we're filming in Falls Road and Shankill Road, some of the kids think that it's still not safe to go on the other side. Whether that's true or not, that's a whole different question. So some of them are still like growing up with opinions, thinking that it's not safe for them to be in the other area. You know, on top of that, I have to talk about other problems that Northern Ireland has been facing. So the reason you might have heard like helicopter sounds in the background is that we arrived the day after there was like a horrific crime of a stabbing. Some guy literally tried to, like a migrant tried to decapitate this guy on the streets. And there were a lot of protests going on when we arrived. Like buses and Ubers were not working for the first 2 days of filming this video. So we had to be out during the working hours getting our shots, and then we had to like walk back an hour to East Belfast. On the first day we even saw mostly kids, I would say, or like young guys with like balaclavas on, who eventually ended up like burning buses and cars down and even houses down near where we lived. So I guess there's like other problems that this country is dealing with more than the Protestant Catholic conflict, it seems like these days. As we're filming this video in front of the city hall, as we're crossing the street, we saw like armored like police cars. I think they're like the riot police. There were even like cages on the lights on top of the police. So that is the level of violence, I guess, the city deals with. Yeah, and it was also interesting was that like earlier when I was filming in Ballymurphy, the people were just acting suspicious. There was one guy who like brought his camera up to my phone asking me what I was doing, and then there's another guy just like walked behind the camera and like flipped me off for no reason at all. So I'm not sure what's going on, but there's more tensions in this city beyond the Protestant Catholic tensions. An interesting photo that Eoin showed me was in one of the protests. There were people holding the Irish flag and the Union Jack flag side by side, which is like something you would never ever see in a protest in Northern Ireland 30 years ago. But back to unification. Even if the vote for unification happened and it passed, it would be an extremely complicated process. The negotiations would be extremely complicated to figure out how the transfer of power would work politically and economically. It would probably take decades, if not many, many years. At the same time, many younger people seem more focused on peace and stability than old divisions. So while Irish unification may seem more likely than before, Northern Ireland still has a very uncertain future. All we can hope for that the path that they take going forward is a peaceful one. That is it for this video. If you like this video, feel free to like it. If you want to watch more videos like this, feel free to subscribe to my channel. And if you want to watch videos about Irish history or just about Ireland in general, just travel videos, you can follow my friend Eoin's channel and page. I'll link everything in the description. If you want real-time travel updates from me, feel free to follow me on Instagram at Nadir on the go. I've been making more travel documentaries lately, like regular viewers of you might notice, and that's the direction I think this channel is going into more. And I'll try to make some more very interesting ones in the near future. I'll catch you in the next video from I don't know where, most likely Tajikistan. Let's see if I get the visa.